Have you ever wondered what defines who you truly are? From the moment we are born, we are taught to believe that we are a separate self, an individual with a name, a story, and a purpose. But what if all of this is nothing more than a mental construct? A narrative we create to make sense of life, while something much deeper, silent, and eternal remains hidden right before our eyes? If everything you believe to be true about yourself is just an illusion, what remains? This is the question we are going to explore. Who are you really? From an early age, we are conditioned to believe that we are an independent self, separate from the rest of the world. This notion is constructed through our names, social identities, memories, and experiences. It seems obvious. I am this body, this thought, this story. But have you ever stopped to think about where exactly this idea comes from? We are told that we are our minds, and the mind loves to create narratives. It assigns labels and meanings to organize the reality around us. However, there is a crucial detail we overlook. The mind is merely a tool, a filter. What we call I is, in fact, a concept created by the mind to give coherence to our experiences. But are we really just this limited self that lives within our thoughts? To understand this, let us look at the body. Throughout life, it is in constant change. Cells die and regenerate, its appearance transforms, its sensory perceptions evolve. The body you inhabit today is not the same as the one you inhabited 10 years ago. So, if the body changes, how can it define who you are? And the mind? It too is in constant flux. Thoughts come and go, memories fade or are altered, beliefs change over time. What you firmly believed at age 10 is likely not the same as what you believe now. If your mind is so volatile, can it truly be your essence? There is an analogy that helps us understand this illusion. Imagine a glass filled with water. It's easy to say, this water belongs to the glass, not the ocean. But if we pour this water into the sea, where does the glass end and the ocean begin? Similarly, the self we believe to be separate is like the water in the glass. It seems distinct, but it has always been part of something much greater. This illusory separation also appears in our emotions. When we say, I am angry, or I am sad, we believe these emotions define who we are. But look more closely. These emotions are merely energies passing through you, like a cloud crossing the sky. And what happens to the sky when the cloud disappears? It remains there, unchanged. You are not the emotion. You are the space in which it occurs. And what about the past and the future? Two pillars that sustain this identity of self. When we think of the past, we see memories, disconnected fragments that the mind organizes into a narrative. The future, on the other hand, is often filled with projections and worries. But neither is real. Only the now exists. So how can something as fleeting as memories and expectations define who we are? Another important point is attachment to mine. My body, my mind, my story. This sense of possession creates an even greater sense of separation. But what if everything you call mine is actually just a reflection of something greater, like the glass and the ocean? If we let go of attachment to mine, what remains? The idea of a separate self is the source of much of our suffering. We live trying to protect this self, feed it, reinforce it. We want it to be loved, respected, recognized. And yet, the search for external validation never seems enough, does it? There is always an emptiness that no achievement or approval can fill. Why is that? The answer may lie in the illusory nature of this self. If it is merely a mental construct, a collection of stories and labels, it's natural that it can never bring us fulfillment. After all, how could something that isn't real satisfy what is eternal? When we begin to question this illusion, a new perception arises. What if what we call self was never separate? What if, behind the stories, emotions, and thoughts, there is something much greater, always present, observing everything? Throughout history, great thinkers and mystics have said the same thing. The separate self is like a dream. It seems real while we are asleep, but upon awakening, we realize we were never confined to it. And you, are you ready to start questioning this dream? Are you prepared to look beyond what the mind has made you believe? Close your eyes for a moment. Feel the air entering and leaving your lungs. Notice the sounds around you, perhaps silence or even the distant sound of a car. Now ask the question, who or what is perceiving all of this? It is an answer that doesn't come from the mind, but from direct experience itself. Consciousness is not something you can point to or fully describe. It is not in the body, though it perceives the body. It is not in the mind, though it notices thoughts. It is something that simply is. This consciousness is like the horizon, always present, yet not a specific point you can grasp. A fascinating detail about consciousness is that it makes no effort. While thoughts require energy to arise and fade, and emotions consume our attention and vitality, consciousness simply observes. It is like the sky. Clouds may pass by, but the sky doesn't try to hold them or push them away. It simply is. If everything in life, thoughts, emotions, sensory experiences, comes and goes, what remains? The answer is always the same: consciousness. But have you ever noticed how we rarely pay attention to it? Why are we so busy focusing on the content of experience that we forget to notice the one who is experiencing? Try a small experiment now. Focus on your breath for a few seconds. Notice how the air flows in and out without your needing to control it. And then ask, what is aware of this breathing? This simple inquiry can open a new perception. You are not the one breathing, nor the sensation of the air. You are that which is aware of it all. But is this consciousness limited to you? This question takes us even deeper. Consider the sound of a bird singing in the distance. The consciousness that perceives the sound is the same that perceives your internal emotions. Is there truly a separation between what is inside you and what is outside? Or is everything being perceived by something universal? It is curious that we live our lives so attached to what is fleeting, to the next thought, the next emotion, the next challenge, that we forget to look at what is permanent. Yet, when we stop to notice this constant presence, something fascinating happens. The sense of urgency, of restlessness, of emptiness begins to fade away. Consciousness is not just an observer. It is also the space where everything happens. But this raises a question. Why, then, do we feel so separate? Why do we have the impression that we are an isolated self, while the rest of the world is out there? The answer might lie in conditioning. From an early age, we learn to identify with what can be named: our body, our thoughts, our possessions. But consciousness cannot be named because it is not an object. It is the very act of perceiving. And it is precisely for this reason that we overlook it. Imagine you are in a forest, looking at the trees. Your attention focuses on what is in front of your eyes: the trunk, the leaves, the movement of the branches. But we rarely notice the space that makes all of this visible. Consciousness is like that space, invisible but essential. If you take a moment to observe, you will realize that consciousness is not in time. It does not belong to the past or the future. It exists only in the now. Even when you remember something or plan for tomorrow, it is in the present that those memories or plans are being perceived. So, what does it mean to live completely in the now? This silent presence that is consciousness is not somewhere far away, waiting to be discovered. It is already here, right now. But to feel it, you must let go of identification with what is fleeting. Are you willing to do that? From an early age, we learn to say, mine. My name, my house, my toys. This small, seemingly innocent habit marks the birth of the ego. The idea that we are a self separate from the world, an individual that needs to protect and assert itself. But what, exactly, are we protecting? The ego grows alongside us, absorbing beliefs and expectations. It's like an artisan carefully crafting a mask to present to the world. Over time, however, we forget that we're wearing this mask. We begin to believe that it is our face. But are we truly the role we play? At its core, the ego is a survival mechanism. It was born to help us navigate the world, but quickly became something larger, a constant, insistent voice that craves validation. It tells us, I am important because I have this, or I am nothing without that. But what happens when we lose what the ego deems essential? The ego is deeply tied to fear. It fears being ignored, rejected, forgotten. For this reason, it seeks security in everything. In work, in relationships, in achievements. But does this security truly exist? No matter how many accomplishments we accumulate, the ego always wants more. Why does it never seem to be enough? Now, look at your life. How many decisions have you made to avoid wounding your ego? Perhaps you've avoided saying what you truly think out of fear of appearing weak. Perhaps you've gone out of your way to please others, just to be accepted. But do these choices truly reflect who you are, or were they made to protect this idea of self? Another fascinating characteristic of the ego is its resistance to change. It clings to its stories because it fears being exposed. For example, if you believe you're a good person, even a small mistake can trigger an internal crisis because it threatens the identity the ego has built. But are you only a label, or is there something deeper within you? The ego doesn't operate only individually. There is also the collective ego, shaped by societal and cultural expectations. Think about it. How many times have you followed what society expects of you, even if it didn't feel authentic? The collective ego says, you must be successful, you must get married, you must fit in. But who decided these rules? Interestingly, the ego loves turning external situations into internal dramas. Imagine someone doesn't respond to your message. The ego immediately says, I'm not important to this person. But is that true, or is it just an interpretation created to protect the ego's identity? The ego's impact goes beyond beliefs. It amplifies emotions. A critique becomes a personal attack. A failure turns into an unbearable burden. Why do we give so much power to these interpretations? Is it the situation itself that truly hurts, or is it the ego fighting to keep its mask intact? But if the ego is a mental construct, why does it feel so real? Because we never stop to question it. The ego is like a sandcastle. As long as no one touches it, it seems solid. But when you look closely, you realize it's just an illusion that dissolves under the light of awareness. The ego is also a master of creating distractions. It focuses on what you need to do, achieve, and prove. Meanwhile, it diverts your attention from what truly matters, the present moment. How many times have you missed appreciating the now because you were preoccupied with what the ego says is lacking in your life? The issue isn't to eliminate the ego. It is not your enemy. The ego is a tool, but we've made it the master. The real problem arises when we forget that it's only a part of our experience, not the totality of who we are. So, what would it be like to live without being controlled by the ego? What would it be like to make decisions not based on fear but on freedom? Perhaps it doesn't mean rejecting the ego but deeply understanding it. After all, how can we free ourselves from something we have yet to fully comprehend? Birth is one of the most celebrated events in life. We record the date, keep photos, recount stories. It symbolizes the beginning of everything. But does physical birth truly define who you are? What if what you believe to be your essence was never really born? It may seem like an absurd idea at first glance, but it holds one of the deepest secrets about existence. What we call birth is merely the beginning of a body, of a form. This form grows, changes, ages, and eventually ceases to exist. But the essence, the one that observes and experiences life, is not limited by this form. Think of who you were as a child. Your body was different, your mind held other ideas, yet there was something constant, observing then just as it observes now. And here's something fascinating. Even before we learned what the world is, before we knew what a name or an identity was, we already existed. Remember, when you were a baby, you knew nothing about yourself, but that didn't mean you weren't. You were pure presence, without words, without concepts, without separation. The true birth, then, doesn't happen when the body enters the world, but when the idea of I arises. It is the moment we begin to think, I am this, or I am that the illusion of separation is born. This psychological birth is what creates the sense of being limited and distinct beings. But does this idea truly reflect who we are? Imagine your identity is like a piece of clothing you wear. It can change throughout life. At one moment, you are a child, then a parent, a friend, a professional. But just like clothes, these identities are not who you are. They are roles, stories that come and go. What remains when these stories are set aside? If we were never truly born, then death must also be reevaluated. What we call death is not the end of what we are, but simply the conclusion of a temporary form. It's like the blooming of a flower. It emerges, blossoms, withers, but the cycle of life continues. The consciousness that observes all this doesn't disappear, because it was never bound to what is transient. Why, then, do we fear death so much? Because we believe we are what can be lost. But can what is eternal truly disappear? Can what was never born really die? When we take the time to examine these questions, we begin to see that our greatest fear, the fear of ceasing to exist, may just be an illusion. The idea of never having been born leads us to another profound understanding: freedom. If you were never born, it means you were never bound. There is no self that needs to be protected, no role that needs to be played. Everything we think we are simply happens, like clouds forming and dissolving in the sky. Life, then, can be seen as a continuous flow, without beginning or end. Just as a river is never fixed, our essence is always in motion but never ceases to be what it is. This realization transforms our relationship with time, with others, and, most importantly, with ourselves. John Wheeler stated that we were never born because what we are is eternal, untouched by time. This is not just a philosophical thought, but a practical truth that can completely change the way we view our existence. Think about it. If you were never born, what is living right now? It's not the body, which constantly changes, nor the mind, which is always in motion. It is something beyond time and space, something that simply is. And that is your true essence. From an early age, we are taught to believe that being in control is essential for living well. We try to control our thoughts, our feelings, our decisions, and even the behavior of those around us. After all, control gives us a sense of security, doesn't it? But is that really true? Or is the need for control trapping us in a state of constant tension and dissatisfaction? The paradox of control is that the more we try to grip life, the more it seems to slip away. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the less you can hold. But what if holding onto anything wasn't necessary at all? What if the security we seek lay in the very ability to flow with what is, rather than fighting against what we cannot change? When we try to control, we are, in reality, resisting the present moment. We want to shape the moment to fit our expectations. But in doing so, we disconnect from what is truly happening. Have you noticed how we spend more time worrying about what might happen than actually living what is happening now? This need for control often stems from fear. We fear the unknown, failure, rejection, or losing something important. The ego convinces us that if we plan everything, if we anticipate every possibility, we will be safe. But life doesn't follow scripts. No matter how much we try to predict, there is always the unexpected. This means that control is an illusion. Think of a river flowing. You can swim against the current, trying to force your way, or you can let go and allow the flow to carry you. In the end, the river always reaches its destination, regardless of our resistance. Wouldn't trusting the flow of life be lighter than constantly swimming against it? Letting go doesn't mean passivity. Releasing control isn't giving up. It's acting in the present moment without attachment to the outcome. It's like dancing. You don't control every step but allow yourself to be guided by the music. Similarly, life becomes more harmonious when we stop forcing it and start flowing with it. Interestingly, control also stifles creativity. When we are fixated on a specific outcome, we close the door to the unexpected. Yet, the best ideas, the most incredible opportunities, often come when we relax and let things happen. Could it be that what you're striving so hard for is already trying to come to you? Moreover, the need for control distances us from others. We want people to behave according to our expectations, but no one can be controlled. When we accept people as they are, without trying to mold them, we create more authentic connections. Isn't it freeing to realize you don't need to control anyone to be happy? Control also leads us to avoid what we perceive as bad. We try to escape sadness, anger, or failure. But these experiences are as much a part of life as joy and success. When we accept discomfort, we realize it is temporary. Nothing lasts forever. Not difficult emotions, nor challenging situations. Another fascinating aspect is that control disconnects us from spontaneity. Think about how children live. They're not worried about controlling what will happen. They simply play, explore, and create. Could we relearn how to open ourselves to life's spontaneity, even as adults? When you stop trying to control, something magical happens. The weight of "I need to fix everything" begins to lift. The present becomes clearer, more vibrant. You start to trust life, not as something that needs to be manipulated, but as something already in balance. Of course, the ego will always want to take back the reins. It will tell you it's dangerous to let go, that you'll lose your way. But ask yourself, how often has control truly brought you peace? How many times have you achieved everything you wanted, only to discover something still felt missing? Freedom arises when we realize we don't need to fight against life. True strength lies in accepting the flow without resistance. It's acting with presence and letting life unfold naturally. So, what would happen if you let go of the need to control? Could you discover that life already knows where it's going? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the space of an empty room. Within it, there are chairs, tables, books, perhaps people coming and going. These objects appear and disappear, move around, are added or removed. But the space itself remains untouched. It clings to nothing, resists nothing. Now ask yourself, what if you were like that space? This is the essence of who we truly are. Life teaches us to believe that we are the objects, our thoughts, emotions, achievements, and even our bodies. But in reality, we are the space where all of this happens. This is true freedom, recognizing that even when circumstances change, who you are remains unchanging. Think about it. Over the course of your life, how many things have come and gone? People, jobs, dreams, even the cells in your body. And yet, something within you has remained constant. What is that? What is this silent presence that watches everything pass by? The idea that we are waves in the ocean helps us understand that everything that seems separate is, in fact, an expression of the same whole. But what if we looked from an even broader perspective? What if, beyond being the ocean, we were also the infinite space where the ocean exists? This means we are not just a movement or a form, but the very possibility of everything that is. This understanding dissolves the need to fight against impermanence. Instead of fearing change, we begin to see it as part of a natural flow. Just as the ocean doesn't try to hold onto a wave, we too can learn to let go of what has already served its purpose. After all, what remains when the waves disappear? Only the ocean, vast and untouched. This idea takes us to something even deeper: interconnectedness. Think of your body. Each cell has its individual function, but all work together to sustain the whole. If one cell acted as if it were separate, the body could not survive. Similarly, each of us is a cell within something greater. Can we continue to believe in separation when everything in life is interdependent? This understanding transforms our human relationships. When we realize that we are part of a whole, the me versus them mindset loses its power. How can we hold on to resentment or envy towards something that, at its core, is also a part of us? This realization invites us to live with more compassion, empathy, and acceptance. But what does it mean, in practice, to live as the ocean? It means letting go of attachment to outcomes. When we identify with the wave, we fear failure or rejection. But when we understand that we are the ocean, we realize that the movement of life doesn't depend on our expectations. Everything flows as it must. This doesn't mean we stop acting. On the contrary, we live with greater presence and clarity. When we stop fighting the flow, our actions become more aligned with the moment. It's like dancing. You don't try to control every step, but allow yourself to be guided by the music. This perspective also helps us embrace our emotions. Sadness, joy, anger, they are all waves that rise and fall. Instead of resisting or clinging to them, we can simply observe them pass. After all, no emotion lasts forever. And what about life and death? When we believe we are the wave, The idea of death seems terrifying, as if it's the end of everything. But when we understand that we are the ocean, we see that death is merely the end of one form, not of what we truly are. The ocean continues, infinite and serene. John Wheeler expressed this simply: "We were never born, and we never die. We have always been the whole." This truth dissolves fear, not as an idea, but as a living experience. Now, look at your own life. How many times have you felt trapped by roles, labels, or expectations? What if, instead of trying to protect the wave, you remembered that you are the ocean? How would that change the way you live and love? This is the question that remains. What would happen if you stopped identifying with the fleeting form and started living as the eternal whole? Throughout this journey, we've seen that what we believe ourselves to be, the self with its stories, labels, and limits, is just a superficial layer of our true essence. We've discovered that we are not the character in this narrative, but the stage where all experiences unfold. We are not the wave that rises and falls, but the ocean itself, vast and eternal. Realizing that we were never truly born, that we are the unchanging consciousness behind all forms, is not just a philosophical concept. It is an awakening to freedom. When we release the bonds of control, fear, and the illusion of separation, we see that life flows perfectly, even amidst its challenges. The question that arises then is, are we willing to live as the ocean? If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've carefully selected a few videos filled with profound insights and fascinating discoveries that you'll love. Just click on one to begin. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step to transforming your reality.